Well, since we've not really been affected by this, but you're talking about plannings and mitigations and interventions.
I think start off with what the Ministry of Health did last week on Friday.
Yes.
On Friday, I think that was very positive. I mean, much as it affected us in the Kenya Open, and we had an almost ready. The event was ready to take off. I think when we were actually kept abreast of the potential of that happening before it happened, and it was just stating that the government does not want the cost of trying to mitigate to actually treat the coronavirus in this country. So the key thing is to stop the opportunity of that virus coming into the country. And that's been the focus. And I think that is the right thing to do. Right? And if we spend more on prevention and basically trying to put as many barriers as possible, and also be in the preparedness to actually do the right thing. Like Italy, it took a long time for them to actually get to the place where they could make the right decisions. I think because of the way we've been schooled here already, we are in a position whereby if we do get, and touch wood, it doesn't happen. If we do get a confirmed case in this country, there are already the contingency plans to actually make sure that, or try and minimize the likelihood of that getting into the population. And that is a key thing. Stop it from getting into the population, because once it gets into the population, you have to shut down the whole country and let it basically die out naturally before you can open up the country again. That is really what is happening in China, and Italy has just decided to do that. The US has decided to stop all flights from Europe. They're basically minimizing the risk. Because if you looked at that map that was there, in terms of the red areas, Europe was red, all of it. Yeah. So basically you said that area is a potential source of that virus. And if you look at anything that has come into Africa, all of it has come from Europe. There isn't anything that has gone from one African country to another yet. Right? And the hope is that that is exactly what's going to happen. So Kenya should learn from China, Italy, and be as bold as the US has been to basically
but
say
something
stop.
we need to learn, point you pointed about China, and I think this is what perhaps they have managed to do it. If you look China and Southeast Asia countries, Singapore, all these areas, people follow the law.
Absolutely.
They are told this is not good, they will not do it. If you go to Italy, US, it's my rights.
Yes.
So imposing those kind of things in those countries is very difficult. And I think that's why we come in. The government is very clear. If this, you stay indoors, you stay indoors. And I think to me that's why it's actually those countries are managing it more. The only issue, excuse me, probably I have with Trump, I'm not quite sure why only UK
Has been left out.
Has been
Yes.
exempted.
Yeah, and that one I don't understand. And I can go perhaps with the two guys, Boris and him. Because in terms, even you look, UK is more threatened by what's happening in Europe
Yeah.
because of the nearness of the countries. And therefore, if he has to do a ban, I think it should be all the way, but not piecemeal. But I think as we did also, and I think Patrick probably could have brought this, the whole idea of the government saying the only planes coming from Italy is go and pick their people who are stranded there and go.
Yeah.
I think that's, to me, is a very good move. I still think there's still something we need to address. And I don't know how far we go in terms of African Union coming very strongly and addressing this. Ethiopian Airlines is still irresponsible. They're still the ones flying there. They're still flying to China.
All right.
I hope there's a lot of mitigation, because it's very easy, prone to move from Ethiopia to a country like this or any other part of Africa. And therefore, I think it's something we need a more concerted effort. I think in the short term, I will not really talk about economic stimulus. It's more prevention.
Prevention. Yeah.
It's more prevention than anything else. In the medium term, we can talk about the economic stimulus. And that economic stimulus will boost what my friend from KM is talking about. So right now, let's focus on how. And water, as you're saying, Collins, is important. If you don't have that water, how do you do it? And they really take opportunity, I'm challenging any county in this country to come what we call agri-city. We don't have an agri-city. We have Garden City, Tattoo City. Can you come with an agri-city?
Kwanza City.
The one that is nearest starting from that is actually Makueni.
Yeah.
Just, they're moving in that direction.
Watch this space. In 6 months, we have in Kiambu.
Take off.
Take off.
All right. Briefly, let's wind up on the coronavirus
Kiambu is
and
going to be
see
a
also how
complexity.
other sectors are faring on as well.
But I actually wanted just to make one point, because if you listen to some of the comments on Twitter, one of the people said, how can we be talking about increasing production when government is still taxing people as high as possible? And I think for me, the one lesson that we can learn from this process and government action is the importance of policy making and policy responses. I think if you have policies that are well thought through and that have done a clear analysis, you're able to respond to things. If you see what the Ministry of Health has done, in terms of saying, let's stop this flight from coming, that's a policy response to an issue. But a lot of the times, we make policies as jokes, and we don't realize, hey, what are we really responding to? And I think this should be an opportunity for our policy making to start being much more evidence-based. Let's start having MPs discussing critical policy issues. So, for example, if we're debating about which big four to go on to, let's not be because I like this. Let's ask
impeachment.
ourselves, so what is the important thing? When we start discussing our budget, let's ask ourselves not how much is coming to my constituents, but what is the policy rationale for allocating X to this sector and not Y to the other sector. I think that's where we should be moving.
Thank you. All right, let's wind up with that and also try and see what the Business Daily is holding for us today. And briefly also we shall touch on Talo Oil Shocker Bill, the 204 billion shillings Turkana oil bill. People are asking, is that really justified? Even also the government was really shocked by this. That is much, much later. But looking at the front page of a Business Daily, if I may, and just pick it up, we have Kiroshe risking KRA assets seizure of a 9 billion shillings bill. Taxman enforcement of unpaid tax includes attachments and coveting property. We've discussed this here before, and this development now happened yesterday from the courts. Also, Cop Bank rescues Jamie Bora in buyout deal. Maybe Abilulaka will comment on this a bit. And also, Patrick, about what is really happening in the banking sector right now. We have all these mergers. We have right now also, we've not had any takeover. Has there been a takeover, as it were, right now? There has been with the KCB.
Well, I think the whole debate about consolidation in the banking sector has been there for quite some period of time, and there have been, views on both sides in terms of, is this the right time for consolidation? Are we going to see more of them? My own view is that I think there is a lot that could be happening. A number of entities readjusting themselves to the new environment and therefore trying to see what is the best way forward, trying to identify synergies amongst yourselves and therefore trying to see which is the best combination going forward. And therefore, the Cop Bank Jamibora deal that has been more or less been made public to the fact that it's actually going on, I think is a move in that direction, where we see an entity that has gotten some very specific advantages in the market and another one having specific advantages, and they see opportunities in coming together. So this deal may not be the last one. I think there might be more coming up in the market. And I think it's just the right way to go, because it's one thing is fostering financial stability in the banking sector. Yeah.
Right. Patrick?
I think Habil is better pleased to talk about that. But obviously, I think just as a general thing, rather than talking as a banker or a financial services person, I think what you'll get as pressures come on the sector, you begin to get consolidation, and that will happen. I mean, you're seeing that consolidation in the financial services sector, not just banking, in all of them. And that basically looks at the fact that there was an over-investment in that sector for quite a period of time. And then, obviously, with the economy where it is now, the margin pressure on a lot of those institutions is very high. And the only way you can sort of respond to margin pressure is basically by getting volume. And the whole area of financial services globally is volume, not margin. And I think the country is beginning to adjust to the fact that you really need to start getting economies of scale, getting up to size, to be able to now continue to grow in the financial services sector. We've seen that happening with the NCBA coming on board, and you're going to see a lot more of those things happening, not just in the banking sector, but also in the insurance sector, and so forth and so on.
So it looks like the first-tier banks are swallowing up also the lower-cadre banks as it is right now. Is it what is it really informing this particular shift because we thought there was an exponential growth, especially with maybe the third-tier banks. I don't know.
I think it's a defensive mechanism as well, and as Patrick says, it's all about economies of scale. So by merging your operations, streamlining them, getting more productivity and more efficiency out of your assets and your returns on investment, that's all about it. Within our own business, for example, we've merged 6 printing companies together. So it's not just a feature of the banking industry. I think you're going to see more and more consolidation within industry, within a lot of industries, possibly even insurance, come through, just purely to get scale, and number 2, drive efficiencies and production out. Because number 1, you can't increase price in virtually any industry right now. The only thing you can do is control costs, and that's probably a driver now. Yeah.
Right. And you're also seeing, I think, the impact, especially in the financial services and stuff like that, is you're beginning to see the impact of technology, of IT, right?
The digital economy.
Yeah, the digital economy. And investment in digital is not cheap, by the way. People think about, just going to digital and you're there. Getting the right digital is not cheap, right? And therefore, even investing in that means that you're still got that margin pressure on you. So you've still got to start getting economies of scale to make the digital investment work for you. So it's all about the recalibration of the economy all around.
All right.
But I actually agree with my colleagues. It's both negative and positive. And I think the negative is that it's an indication of how the economy is performing.
Yeah.
When the economy is robust, every small business can be able to thrive. When it is not, then you must be able to respond to it. And I think the response is because of the performance of the economy. That's the negative side of it. I think the positive is that, thankfully, as opposed to collapses, we are then seeing readjustments to be able to respond to the prevailing economy, but also to prepare for the future. Yeah, a future where you are less labor intensive and more technological. So if you even relate it to the conversation we were having in the previous conversation, coronavirus, it's also an opportunity of saying the economy, the businesses of the future will even be working from home. And how do you adjust that in terms of the in terms of the technological innovations? It's much easier when you have bigger enterprises, are able to invest more and they're able to innovate more. I think that's the response we're seeing.
All right. All right, Gituro, finally.
Yeah, I think to me, we probably have so many banks that probably should be having. And I think the point, I think Corinne can put it, I think it's not corrupt, it's the merger. I think that's important. And the question is, how do leverage on efficiency for productivity? So I think it's the right thing to do in it. But there's something perhaps you had asked about the TARO. I think TARO is...
We'll come to it much later. Yes,
but I think the banks, I think we're not saying they're collapsing. And you notice, for instance, the Chase Bank, we have really managed that. And I really, we must give Joroge the good work he probably moving that area. And of course the chair, Mohamed Nyaoga.
Right, thank you. Maybe back to the Business Daily. The headlining story today is all about Keroshe. As I mentioned, risks carry assets, a seizure of 9 billion shillings bill. And earlier on, we saw there were reactions also on the way KRA reacted to this particular developing story. We just want to get our reactions from our panelists. Taxman enforcing of unpaid tax includes also attachments and caveating property as it is. In an environment where we want to, enable businesses to thrive, you think this is the wisest fashion for KRA to really react now that they're slapping this particular 9 billion bill on Keroshe? What is the future of Keroshe?
I think there's two aspects to this. I believe Keroshe will have submitted an application to the High Court to contest this. So they will use the legal avenues to pursue this till the end. And I believe they've disputed the tax tribunal's decision. Keroshe have disputed the tax tribunal's decision. So they have the entitlement to go to the High Court and get a judgment. Failing that, they'll probably go to the Court of Appeal. Anyway, the issue here is when you slap a business with what we call a very punitive amount, is that company going to be able to survive and pay tax revenues in future? And the issue is, are you able to have an arbitration mechanism such that you're able to keep the company afloat and it continues to contribute to tax revenues in future and protect jobs. And I believe that would be probably the most suitable outcome if such an avenue can be explored.
Great. Patrick.
I think we haven't seen the end of this. A bill of that size, and I'm just being myself now, a bill of that size to have gone for a period of time without being detected by a revenue authority, I think is in a way irresponsible, right? I mean, an organization such as a brewer, let's not just talk about Kirochi, the amount of tax that should come out of that place should be very clearly visible, right?
Predictable, yes.
Yeah, it should be visible. And you should basically be getting in there and basically have, this should have not have been one case, it should have been 30 cases if that tax was really due. So I think here there's a lot of, there's too much smoke for, and there's a very small fire at the bottom of it. And my view is that this is too big for anybody to handle. So it has to go to the highest court in the country for somebody to make a decision that is going to have this kind of, to write off or write in this kind of bill will require somebody who has really looked through all the pros and cons and understands fully the impact all across. Because justice is about weighing the full basket of impacts. Justice is not about a single linear thing that is very narrow.
Agreed.
Right? And I think this is one of these cases that is going to test the judicial system in whichever way to make sure that the outcome of this is going to be something that you can quote in the future about the issues of tax in this country. This is going to be one of these that requires a Solomon moment. Right? And I don't want to sort of put a one way or the other. There are a lot of issues under this that maybe discussing it may not give it the, the full exposure. In this. And I am watching this with keen interest.
But in terms of incentivizing the business environment,
this kind of stuff, I think the whole issue of, for the business community, let me talk about the generic issue rather than this one. If you look at the number of cases that have gone to the tax tribunal over the last 2 or 3 years, it's gone up. It's almost exponentially gone up. And it's because a lot of the people are not willing to make decisions about tax queries. So everybody's kicking the can down the road. This happens to be a big one. But if you go to the workload of the tax tribunal at the moment, it's like this. So structurally, we need to be bold in terms of making decisions on tax. But at the moment, what is happening is, kick it down the road, let somebody else make the decision, then we apply it. Right? And for industry, that is not good.
But I think we have a tendency, we don't like paying taxes.
That is true.
And I think we need to
let him finish. Let him finish. We'll come to you, Dr.
And I think I'm just going to... The issue of paying taxes is one, but the issue of paying the right taxes is another.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think the issues here are that there's a lot of times that people are coming in and being locked in for, you're being locked in for the wrong reason, using tax as a fighting tool. So whilst there is, I think the issue of the right processes is important, and we should sort that out so that the tax regime, people are very clear about what is and is not taxable. And then you have very few items that really now you're saying, these ones are now the ones that need to go through to the tribunal to be sorted out because we do not have a ruling. But to use the tribunal and the legal system to make all the rulings for the tax people is wrong. But right, there are also people who basically are criminal in tax. Let that happen to them.
Thank you.
Exactly.
That is.
And I'm not saying Kiroche is one of them.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
I'm not.
Deval, actually, for me, I think this is the right way to go. And this is why. Last year, KRA decided to shut down Kiroche on criminal aspects, and we all complained. I think that was wrong. You cannot be criminalizing what is essentially a civil debt. First, I think the fact that this has now gone through the civil aspect is the right thing. And the fact that Patrick says it will go until the Supreme Court, for me, I think is perfect. We should never use criminal tools to fight what is essentially a civil matter. Secondly, if you look at the figures, and Patrick is right, it tells you there's more than meets the eye. And maybe that's why criminality was being used as opposed to addressing the fundamental issues. I think this provides an opportunity of asking ourselves, number one, how can we reach a situation where a company owes 9 billion? How is that, what really happened? Is it that the figures are overstated, or is it that somebody slept on the job? And those are things that we must be able to ask. And I haven't seen the ruling from the tax appeal, but that's what we need to get into. And the third thing that arises out of it is we then need to ask ourselves, having determined where the reality is, let's assume Keroche owes, how do we ensure that whatever we do does not lead to its shutdown?
Absolutely.
Number two, does not lead to this kind of thing being repeated into the future. I think that's the more fundamental issue. So, because the reality is, if you slap them with 9 billion and ask them to pay tomorrow, you are essentially also saying you're killing them.
You're killing them.
We don't want, we should not kill any company, especially an indigenous company, especially in this business environment. But I think for me, the fact that it's going to the High Court and going up is useful, but let it be an opportunity not just of determining the amount. Let it be an opportunity of determining what's really happening in terms of how we are doing our tax business.
Our tax regime in the country. Maybe also we can hear from Dr. Habilo.
Yeah, I mean, I think this case in particular has captured our attention. It has been in the press for quite some, given the figure that has been quoted, I think it's attracting our attention. And I think I was drawn by the fact that I read through what the first one I saw was KRA's statement. And then I also saw Keroche's response. And it's good that at this moment in time they are going to the next step, which is they are disputing the ruling of the tax appeals tribunal, and now they are taken to the next stage, which is the High Court. And possibly, as we discuss this, I think we should also be alert to the fact that given that the matter is being arbitrated upon, I think we should withdraw our views, especially if it might affect the decision that will, the whole process. But having said that, I think one thing that comes out is the fact that, in my view, the 9 billion looked a little bit on the higher side in view of the fact that this is an entity, and 9 billion is not a small amount of money. But looking at the two arguments, it boils down to the fact that the basis of computing the tax was different from what Keroche assumed and what KRA is imputing. And therefore, on one, the tax liability is lower than on the other. And the whole thing is about the process. One is arguing about the process that was used. One is talking about dilution and all that. And I think let the process take its stand. I think they are going to the next stage, which is the High Court. In case it doesn't satisfy them, they'll move to the next level, which is the Court of Appeal, and let it take its course. At least let's give them a fair chance.
All right, Dr. Gituro.
Yeah, I think to me it's, and I want to make clear that we know people who have evaded tax, but if it's right, I think if it's, we need to find a way of soft landing. And you can come. I think KRA has a problem. They always like, what would I call them? They get a kick when you have so much to pay to them. They're like happy all the way. But I think if this is the case, perhaps we have to we must keep Keroche fruiting. That's the first thing to come in. Then we go down, what are the ways? If this is the right amount or is not, how do you deal with that? And I think to me, that's what probably we should do. And I think what KRA should appreciate, or the tax regime in this country, yes, there was a sleeping at the job, but they should encourage more people to come in terms of production companies, so that we can create opportunity for our people. And that's what Keroche does. But also, that self-regulation is extremely important. As Keroche have a responsibility, or any other company for that matter, to pay taxes. And this came up in terms of, if I recall, during the IPO for Safaricom, we had a lot of low stockbrokers, messed up the whole industry. You get a mama from Nyeri or whatever, or Bugoma, sells a cow together to buy them. But these stockbrokers went all over. So there's somewhere you have to manage ourselves. And I'm not saying that Keroche could be in it, but I think what we need to do is let's get the bottom of it. Even if it goes to Supreme Court and there's a certain amount be paid or not be paid, I think it's important we find them a way of paying it in a softer way.
Right. Thank you. I'll be remiss if we don't also wind up the show by looking at what is happening, especially in the oil sector. Just briefly, won't discuss it very extensively. And this is what we ran yesterday on the front page of the Business Daily. There was a shocker, such an eye-popping figure. People wondering how then even the government is grappling with this particular amount that we have here. The Ministry of Petroleum rejects Talo's compensation bill, arguing it was excessive and not justified. Talo shocks state with 204 billion shillings, and we just want to maybe, I think Patrick Obat, this snugly fits, you know,
This is his area.
your portfolio.
Yes.
Yeah, tell us about this development, because of course, from the downstream and upstream, where are we at?
I think oil exploration is not for the faint-hearted. That's the first statement I'll make. It's not for the faint-hearted. The movement of one rig to drill one hole is I mean, just the drilling of one hole costs about $20 to $30 million. What is that in Kenya shillings? It's a lot, right? So if you're talking about success to find oil, you're talking about drilling maybe 20 or 30 holes in the ground. So that's $20 million a shot. That is $400 million. And that you could do and find zero and walk off. So this is a high stakes game. So let's just talk about the oil business is a high stakes game. The key element is that when you start down that road, your agreements between the government and the exploration company have got to be very clear about the liabilities plus the rewards that happen at the end. So when a nation starts that, you're saying we have a piece of ground, we have a bit of geology that says there may be oil in this place. So all you start off with as a nation is some land, several, hundreds of thousands of hectares, and you tell somebody, go and look. All you invest is the land. This person has got to get all the technology to come in, start looking for it, and try and find it. And every time they're doing that, they're spending money. And they're borrowing money. And that money they're borrowing comes with a cost. And in any agreement for exploration, the first thing you say is, the minute you find anything, I will recoup my expense of getting here first, before you start seeing the cost of oil. So when you find oil, that's what the discussion is happening now. I'm putting all my costs on the table, and now you've got to agree how you're going to recoup that cost. Because I took a risk, and my risk is now paying off. So I've got to recoup my costs. And an oil company is basically working across the globe, not just here. So they borrow, and they are balancing all their risks around the globe to borrow that money. So here you found oil, you need to get your money back to be able to continue in business. And when you then slap that bill down, and you've been at this now since when? Since about 2004. This is 16 years of exploration. That is not an unreasonable figure. It's just that it's coming out now. And I think in the era of openness in the oil business, the contracts need to be brought to the fore. And the costs need to be brought to the public every year. So we know that on a certain trajectory, this is the amount that has been spent on exploration so far. So that you don't get surprised
By such a
figure, which is not unreasonable, right? There needs to be an audit done in terms of the costs. Are these really just costs for here? Or have you added other costs and so forth?
Thank you.
So the reality is, oil exploration is not a faint-hearted person's business. And our government has got to accept that they have got to pay a certain amount out of the oil that is coming out. It's called cost oil. That is in the contract. And it's a question of just defining how much it is.
All right, thank you. Let's hear from Collins, because there has been issues also.
Patrick works for the oil industry. So this figure cannot be unreasonable.
I don't work for the oil industry. I used to work in the oil industry. So I'm now a Kenyan.
For the oil industry, and has done a lot of support for the extractive sector from a private sector perspective. So I think that figure is not unreasonable from his perspective. I think from the larger perspective, first, I don't pity the government. I don't pity the government because this was coming, and the government pretended it wasn't, and acted against its own interest. Several people, I remember having this conversation with a lot of people in this process and raising the concern that Patrick is now talking about now, about openness, but asking, let's have full disclosure. Because this was going to happen. It's happened everywhere that Talo has been. There's actually an ongoing contestations with Uganda. But we never seem to learn, because if we had been able to disclose the terms of the agreement, every Kenyan would have known this is what we are getting into. I think no less than the governor of Turkana. I remember being in a meeting in Turkana, and the governor of Turkana was saying, I am the governor, I have no idea what the terms of this agreement is. Every time you raise the concern, Talo would say, we have no problem disclosing, but that's the responsibility of government. Government will be mum and will be saying, you know. Now they're
We are bound by contractual agreements, yes.
Now they are slapped with a bill that we are now being told this is the bill because it's going to be our taxpayers' money. I think it is important that we realize that when there are concerns around anything, when people say let's disclose, it's not because they're against it. It's because so that we are able to collectively know what we are getting into and we're able to balance. We should have asked ourselves, by the way, if these are the potential costs, what does it mean? But the second thing, which is actually more fundamental, is we'll have a huge debate with Talo, because determining how much has been spent and by whom, you might find that the only people who are keeping records is Talo. So as government, we'll be reacting. So they have their figures, whether it's figures from Ghana or from Turkana, the basis of contesting it will be on your heart, not on facts and figures. And that's why I don't pity government, because they were warned, but they refused to listen.
Right. Let's hear from Sanjan.
I think my colleagues have touched on this. I agree. There must have been figures put into the original contracts, verify those against what has been submitted. Whatever has been submitted needs to be audited. Due diligence needs to be done properly by government. And if the amounts are due, the government will have to pay out, because it's a contractual obligation. So I think for government to act surprised at this stage is probably disingenuous, because I don't think we can pretend to be shocked by this. Especially if there are contracts to back this up.
All right. Okay. Hamid Laka, briefly. I know we're just taking a cursory look. We'll have a very extensive discussion on this on a dedicated show, just oil and gas sector, what is really happening. Briefly.
I think today we have been talking about huge figures. It's 2 or 4 billion, 9 billion.
How much do you have to say about this?
And I think it boils down to the fact that the whole figure, it hits us and is a shock because of the magnitude of the figure. Same thing happened to the 9 billion. It hits us and is sort of like a shock. And as Patrick said, the figure looks reasonable, given
the 16
the
years
length of time it has taken. And as my friend says as well, you know, it doesn't pity the government either because of the fact. But I think it boils down to the fact that there is lack of transparency. The question is it transparency from the government or transparency from Talo? And given the discussions and what you mentioned, the fact that this thing has been raised before in a number of fora, and at the end of the day, I think the thing rests on the fact that the public have not been warned or alerted to the fact that this thing is building up. It's there, and we'll eventually have to meet it anyway for us to reap the benefits of the oil find. So at the end of the day, I think this points to the fact that we need to be transparent and disclose everything to the public who need to know what they are going to bear.
Thank you. The full disclosure that Collins was talking about. Lastly, let's hear from Dr. Kituro.
Yeah, I think it's something perhaps we need to understand about Taro. I think Taro is going a difficult time as we talk. You notice they have reduced their production. And secondly, I think more importantly, the exploration director and the CEO quit. That has a terrible impact on it. But I think fundamentally, what I bring to the table, I think as a government now, we need to manage the expectations. There are so much high expectation of this oil from Turkana. And I think that's the key. Now, how do we manage those expectations in terms of that? Yes, I agree with my team, 204 billion over 16 years. I think that's probably we could have done things differently. And